Okay, up next, we have Anthony Apollo, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission.
There we go. While I figure out the clicker, we'll leave the disclaimer up here. So just to level set before we get into this whole presentation, there has not been a Wyoming stable token issued yet. We have not selected a blockchain to launch on, and nothing I say could be considered legal financial advice. Also, I do not speak for the commission itself. I am the executive director of the commission, but we'll talk about that more here. So again, my name is Anthony Apollo. I've been serving as the executive director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission since September of 2023, so just under 18 months. At the initiation of my career, I did work for the traditional finance sector, both at KPMG and Ernst & Young, predominantly helping GSIBs restructure after the global financial crisis in 2008 in alignment with the Dodd-Frank Act. When you get into the big banks and see how they work, or sometimes don't work all that well, and you learn about Bitcoin and Ethereum at the same time, this would have been fall of 2015, you start pivoting into that direction. So made that my career starting in 2017, joined Consensus to work on an early attempt at tokenized and decentralized intellectual property. I at one point worked with a professional basketball player named Spencer Dinwiddie, then on the Brooklyn Nets, now on the Dallas Mavericks, to do a tokenized debt security with stable token payouts on a monthly basis to investors. And then most recently was working on a platform called Rensa with my brothers, which was a digital multimedia attribution tool that had real-time payouts to content creators, royalties codified in smart contracts, et cetera. I'd moved to Wyoming to do all that work because Wyoming has built an incredible legislative framework that I'll talk about in a second. But since it is that time of the year, it is ETH Denver, I will also note that I was a keynote speaker at the first ETH Denver event back in 2018 when we were still in the Sports Castle. And that was talking about that project at Consensus. So what is the Wyoming Stable Token? What is the commission? What are we trying to do? The Wyoming Stable Token Commission endeavors to launch the first fiat-backed, fully reserved stable token issued by a public entity in the United States in the first half of 2025. The Wyoming Stable Token, or WIST, will be a digital asset on a public blockchain redeemable for $1. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but what we're saying here is a state is looking to issue a stable token that looks similar to USDC, looks similar to PYUSD, may have some additional benefits to it, but we do expect that this will be a domestic product, an international product, and on DeFi as well, not limited to the four corners of the state of Wyoming. So why is Wyoming doing this? Why is the state getting involved with this? Wyoming has a legislative framework around cryptocurrencies, digital assets, and blockchain writ large that goes back to 2016. 75 plus pieces of legislation have been put forth, 45 plus pieces have been passed, and there's actively more legislation being put on the books as we speak because it is in the midst of our legislative session right now. A stable token was initially put forth as, for one reason, the glue between several disparate initiatives. Let's say you have a bill that allows you to pay your taxes with crypto. We have a digital asset registry in the Secretary of State's office. You are able to register your DAO under an LLC structure, or more recently, a DUNA. So when you have all of these disparate things that are digitally native, and perhaps you want to transfer value between them, a stable token sure seems like a great way to do that. On the other hand, Wyoming is an oil and gas state. At some point, the dinosaur bones dry up. It probably won't be in my lifetime, but it will happen at some point. And the state always needs to think about how it will be generating revenues once that occurs. And digital assets, again, writ large, has been one thing, one industry has been identified as a way to bolster the state's coffers. To put a little bit more specificity on it, I did put this table together. Again, wanting to demonstrate here how broad Wyoming's efforts have been in this sector. There's property rights that go back several years around things like tax exemptions, the digital asset registry. Critical in the state of Wyoming is privacy protection. So we have the prohibition of private key disclosure. That's one of my favorites. You as a citizen cannot be compelled to give up your private keys in any civil or criminal proceeding. We are a state. We cannot compel speech. That's a breach of the First Amendment. And I'm not a lawyer, so take that with a grain of salt, but that is the intent. And someone who looks like a lawyer is nodding in the back there, so thank you. Appreciate that. And of course, we do have several bills in the books around entity structures, corporate structures. I did mention DAO LLCs and more recently the DUNAs, which give a formal legal backing to decentralized organizations. But another great one is the special purpose depository institutions. If you guys are familiar with Caitlin Long and Custodia, that's where she slots into all this. It is essentially a bank-like structure, especially chartered entity that can do bank-like functions as well as custody digital assets. And if you put a revenue diversification band across all of that, that is where the stable token can also fit in. I don't think I need to belabor the point around what stablecoins are, what they're doing. The last presenter had similar information around comparables to Visa's network, but obviously stablecoins have emerged as a killer app in the digital asset sector. And now we'll get in a little bit to how Wyoming came into the fray here and what this looks like. So the Stable Token Act was passed in March of 2023, which did two very simple things. It created the Stable Token Commission, and it gave it one remit, which is to issue the Wyoming Stable Token. The commission was initially 3 participants. They are the governor, auditor, and treasurer of the state of Wyoming. So to say this is a high transparency, high oversight program is an incredible understatement. We have 3 of the 5 elected officials are functionally running the program. The governor is the chairman of the program. We then brought on 4 subject matter advisors. And again, this is a little before my time, but we did bring on a couple of SMAs, one of whom is Flavia Naves, who before her tenure with us was the general counsel of a little firm that you may know called Circle. And we started with a $500K budget. We did get through the Joint Appropriations Committee and get a $5.8 million budget approved. Now, again, that is about 1/100th of what Paxos raised to do theirs, but Paxos didn't have me. So we'll see how that works out. We, as an agency, were authorized to facilitate our own procurement process, which means when we need to build the stable token, we're not hiring a team of 20 developers to go and do this ourselves. We are going to be relying on third parties to help us build that. And I'll say more about our procurement process in a moment because it's pretty much wrapping up tomorrow, which is very exciting. We clarified what assets are permitted to as underlying reserves for the stablecoin. It's very vanilla. It's cash. It's U.S. Treasury securities under a year to maturity. U.S. Treasury security repurchase agreements under 30 days to maturity. Very vanilla, intended to be quite stable, but still interest-bearing. And then interestingly, we also selected 9 candidate blockchains. We ran an exercise through a blockchain selection working group to identify which chains could support the use cases we're looking to launch on, including the payments use case at a retail level. So looking for for networks that had those attributes that could facilitate that. And one thing I'll quickly mention here, because I don't think it's on our next slide, although we certainly refer to the transparency that we have, everything we do, because we are a public entity, is on our website. If you wanted to see every determination we made around the blockchain selection, you can go on our website, look at here's the chains we looked at, here's the criteria, here's the assessment, here's the backing data for it. And we've been incredibly transparent in that capacity, and that will continue. We believe that's one of the benefits of the program. We have to be incredibly transparent about everything we do. All of our meetings and decision-making happens in a public forum, and one of those meetings will be tomorrow if you want to tune in. Another benefit here, we do over-collateralize the stable token. So we have a statutory responsibility to maintain a reserve greater than 102% of the notional amount of stable tokens outstanding. Again, bit of a mouthful. What does it mean? If we have 100 million Wyoming stable tokens issued and in circulation, we should have $102 million of cash and treasuries that back it. That is to mitigate against the risk of any kind of depegging. And again, that is in statute. That is the law in Wyoming. And also, this is meant as a public good. When we're generating interest off of those underlying reserves and those flow into the agency, those dollars are not to go pay for a private jet so I can go to all the cool crypto events all around the world every week. On a quarterly basis, those dollars get swept into the school foundation fund in the state of Wyoming. So this is a way to get dollars into our ecosystem without having to increase taxes, without having to open up the 19th horse racing casino downtown, without having to legalize recreational drugs and then tax those. There's another couple considerations here around U.S. debt and dollar hegemony, but looking at the clock, I've got about 4 minutes, so I'm going to keep moving along here. In terms of use cases, again, we do expect to be where you see stable tokens these days. At the institutional level, we do see ourselves being held in some of those facilities that are a bit larger and need, cash or cash equivalents that could be moved quite quickly. From a retail perspective, we do want to be facilitating that peer-to-peer use case as well, and hopefully get people using wallets in a way that can help avoid transaction fees associated with the credit card rails. And internationally, we expect Wyoming stable tokens to be able to flow freely between different countries or jurisdictions. Important to note, we are doing this issuance as a sovereign entity. This is the state of Wyoming issuing the stable token. It's not a bank, it's not a trust, it's the state. And as such, we're not necessarily under the jurisdiction of the EU and MiCA. We're not even under the jurisdiction of New York DFS and their guidance on stablecoins. What I will say is we will try to play nice because we do want to be adopted well in different ecosystems all over the world, but we certainly have some exceptions there that make things interesting for us. In terms of some challenges, some of these are just the converse side of the benefits, but from a regulatory perspective, while we do have the Stable Act and the Genius Act now on the floor of the House and Senate respectively here in the US, nothing's passed yet. And yet, as a state, we need to put rules in place for how we operate. So it's incumbent on our own agency to set rules that'll dictate how we do reserves management, how we do token treatment, so minting and burning, redemptions, potentially interdiction. We have to set all of that in a public forum, and that will have a 45-day public comment period on it before it becomes the rule in the state that's maintained by the agency. In terms of security, that is tantamount for us, as is privacy. We could put those in the same bucket. We are certainly looking at recent developments around zero-knowledge proofs and homomorphic encryption that we think can really bring us to the front of the line in terms of consumer privacy. And from education, while we all in this room may know about stablecoins, it is the Stable Summit. Not everyone in Wyoming does, and not everyone all around the world does. So that'll be something we have in front of us too. In terms of next steps, we have finished a very exciting milestone for ourselves. We are, again, looking to bring on third-party vendors to help us develop, deploy, and manage the stable token. We've had a 4-month-long procurement process, 7 different requests for proposal, dozens of different vendors. We just finished our interviews with qualified vendors yesterday afternoon. I'm celebrating here today with all of you. And then tomorrow when we have our monthly meeting, we will be naming the vendors who scored highest on our assessment, and we will look to start engaging them with contracts within the coming weeks. So the goal for us is to have a Wyoming stable token out on a testnet by the end of next month, and by the end of Q2, I've been saying July 4th, just to keep it patriotic, and also because we have a 6/30 tax year end, so to avoid anything around that. We hope to launch a fully reserved Wyoming stable token on July 4th in conjunction with these partners, and then we expect to expand to multiple networks. One other thing we didn't capture is, along the way here, in terms of additional value adds, one of the things that we are investigating, and I will do the hand wave, we need a legal opinion on this, and this is all speculative for the time being, but the commission is looking into the potentiality to do a yield-bearing stable token here in the US available to US customers. It's activity we've seen predominantly going offshore because no one really could contend with the SEC regime under Gary Gensler here in the States. But we as a state may have some exemptions to securities law that we may look to avail ourselves of. And with 3 seconds left on the clock, I've been Anthony Apollo with Wyoming Stable Token Commission, WIST.io. We'll see you there. Thank you.